10 years ago, I watched a Linus Tech Tips video about a Cooler Master keyboard that would introduce me to a unique type of keyboard switch called Topre, which used rubber domes, yet cost as much or more than a mechanical keyboard. It was an oddity. I struggled to understand it, and I certainly would never be able to grasp how it felt, though I very much wanted to. The knowledge of this strange, seemingly nonsensical alternative to the cherry-style mechanical keyboard would stay in the back of my head for years like a curse, clawing at me, until I couldn't take it anymore and had to figure out what the deal was for myself. In 2018, I purchased a Topre Realforce keyboard, and this would send me down a rabbit hole that would prove to be very deep, and would forever change the way I interface with my computer. Now, if you're hardcore into keyboards, you might be groaning at my video title, and yes, people know what Topre is, I'm not breaking news here, but whenever someone comments on one of my videos asking what keyboard I'm using, or I talk keyboards with someone, they literally never know what I'm talking about. And these are people who build their own PCs and are not ignorant to the keyboard scene. Topre, and even more so the Realforce line, have essentially no brand recognition in the West, and while a lot of that can be attributed to a lack of marketing, I think it's also due to how difficult it is to explain and justify these things, something that I've been struggling to do for years now. The conversation usually goes something like, it's a different type of mechanical keyboard switch, but it's technically not mechanical. It actually uses rubber domes, but not in a cheap membrane keyboard kind of way. It's different from that. It feels nothing like any other keyboard, and also it's kind of hard to get one and they're really expensive. And by the end of it, both whoever I was talking to and myself leave more confused than when I started. On a surface level, and even a slightly below surface level, the merits of Topre are not easily conveyed. So for a long time now, I've wanted to give these keyboards a proper video, thoroughly explain the switch, how it feels, the models, and really why I love these things so much, and believe them to be some of the best off-the-shelf, all-around keyboards you can buy to improve your typing experience. So your first question might be, what is Topre? But before we get into that, I want to ask, who is Topre? Now, first things first, I have a history of pronouncing peripheral companies' names in a way that draws a bit of scrutiny. The Logitech G203. Logitech, a reputable name like Logitech. So I'm gonna get ahead of it this time and defend my pronunciation. I'm very confident that Topre is the correct pronunciation. They're a Japanese company based in Tokyo, and their name is a portmanteau, very typical with Japanese stuff, of Tokyo, and press, which in katakana is puresu. So in Japanese, it's Topure. I'm 100% on this, but they decided to Romanize it as T-O-P-R-E, dropping the U, so we're left with Topre, which is how I'm going to say it for the rest of the video. Now, if you've ever dug into any Japanese company, you know they invariably have some kind of long origin story that typically dates back to pre-war, and they tend to be very strangely diversified even in the modern era. Yamaha is a well-known one, fighter jets and musical instruments. Meiji is a fun one, you know, the candy company. They also have a vaccine department, classic combo. And it turns out the Topre Corporation is one of those. The company was founded in 1935, and that's interesting because no one in Japan needed a computer keyboard in 1935. They needed, industrial machinery and parts. And that's exactly what Topre was initially founded to do. Tokyo Press is not a cute reference to their unique switch mechanism. It's because they make literal machining presses. In fact, you might already have Topre manufactured products. They're just not on your desk, they're in the garage. They press body panels for cars, they've made bumpers and dashboards. They're also good at making air conditioners and refrigeration units, like for trucks for cold chain storage. Oh yeah, they also make the switches, right. Back in the 70s, an engineer was inspired by Katori Senko, a Japanese mosquito coil, and the Topre switch was born. I swear I'm not making this up, it's straight off the Wikipedia page. So they started doing that back in the 70s, and while they are obviously used for keyboards, they're also apparently used for things like the pin pad on an ATM machine. If you live in Japan and can get me one of those, let me know. I've already got the chopsticks I'm trying to lock in. I have a bit of a penchant for novel, at times impractical versions of a mechanism, be it electrostatic drivers and speakers, or atypical engine configurations in cars, and doubly so when that technology is Japanese. I don't watch anime anymore, but I've just morphed into this to replace that, I guess. Topre switches are one of those oddities. Now, in a normal mechanical switch, the spring is the resistance mechanism, but that's not how it works in Topre world. There's a rubber dome, and that's where the resistance and tactile feedback comes from. Under the rubber dome is a conical spring, the one inspired by Japanese mosquito coils, and that spring does not exist to provide feedback. It exists to register the keystroke by being detected by a sensor on the PCB when it's depressed. This design is called electrocapacitive. There are other brands now like NIS that produce them, but Topre invented it and is like the name brand Coke. Now, when people hear rubber dome, they tend to get confused because membrane keyboards are rubber domes and membrane keyboards are bad. That's why mechanical keyboards are good. Membrane keyboards typically use a very cheap set of domes that you mash on without any distinct feedback. Topre is using way more robust rubber domes that operate independently of each other, and the use of a spring and sensor for registering input make it far more consistent and also doesn't require you to bottom out. Topre switches are rated for 50 million presses, which is about on par with most Cherry MX switches, and I can tell you that even my well-worn 2018 board feels exactly the same as it did new. I've never loved conventional mechanical switches, to be honest. Way back in the day, I started off with a Cherry Blue board, which felt too heavy and annoyingly loud. Then I switched to brown, which I'm convinced is the worst mainstream switch. I've since come to appreciate linear mechanical switches, be it standard reds or something more fancy, but while I love those for gaming, they just kind of lack something for me when it comes to typing. I like tactility, but the kind of tactility that tactile mechanical switches provide is too harsh and sharp for me. That's where Topre steps in. All Topre switches are tactile with a breakpoint in the dome, but I would describe them as smooth and that breakpoint as very natural. Due to the nature of the rubber dome, you break it very easily, and then it kind of gently pops you back out. In terms of a typing experience, it's just not comparable at all to Cherry-style switches. The best way I can describe it is al dente, soft until you reach a firm but not hard core. The sound is also totally unique, and if you ask me, more pleasant. However, aside from all that, the main benefit of these for me has been how comfortable they are to use. I've typed probably thousands of pages worth of stuff on these keyboards, and they've never made me feel fatigued, which is in sharp contrast to mechanical switches where I can feel my fingers start to lock up after a while. I think if you're gaming 90% of the time, you should still go with a linear or Hall effect switch, but if you're a typist or mixed use, and you're like me and never really clicked with mechanical switches, I do genuinely feel that these are the best thing I've ever used, and would highly recommend them to anyone who spends a lot of time typing. Topre switches have been offered in various weights over the years, and at this point, I've extensively used almost all of them. Now, the big exception is the variable weight, which back in the day, Topre touted as a main feature of their board. The idea is that the further the key is away from home row, the lighter the switch weight becomes, to reduce strain on the pinky and ring finger. Ergonomically, it makes sense, but likely requires a huge acclimation period that will make any other keyboard feel weird, and it's also a complete non-starter for gaming use. All the other weights are uniform, with the main weights being 55 gram, 45 gram, and 30 gram. The lower the weight, the less prominent the tactile bump, and the closer it feels to a linear switch. I'll talk about what was offered with each board and explain my findings and recommendations at the end. Now that I've hopefully adequately explained the switches themselves, we can talk about Realforce. Now, as I mentioned, these switches find their way into things like ATM pin pads, but Topre also sells their switches to other keyboard vendors like the Cooler Master from the start of the video and Happy Hacking or HHKB, which is probably more well known than Topre itself. In fact, you've probably seen one of these on someone's desk before, even if you didn't know what it was. But Topre offers their own line of keyboards, Realforce, which use the switch. While the happy hacking stuff is cool in its own right, I have no interest in their unique layout and prefer more standard ones like 10 keyless. That's how I landed on Topre Realforce, which I discovered after looking into the Topre switch itself after that LTT Cooler Master video. So here it is, the keyboard that started it all for me, the 87U. I bought it in 2018, but it looks like it came from 1998, and perhaps it did. This thing is like the before times, before these were really consumer-facing boards and definitely had little intention of appealing to a Western audience. The box, you've got to see this, it's so quaint, it's classic JDM. 10 keyless compact keyboard? Yup. Much better operational performance by electrostatic capacitive system? Okay. No chattering over 30 million times. Great. Good feeling of oneness with cup rubber. Enable to set 5 function by dip switch as described in bottom of package. Now, I'm not the first person to make jokes about this. I mean, I found this tweet from 2015 posted by... Oh. Well, probably the only thing me and him have in common, seeing as he's never lived in the same country as me. Anyway, I'm not the first to make fun of good feeling of oneness with cup rubber, but I am the first to make a sticker out of it. I recently opened my own sticker store, all designed and stocked by me, and I wanted to make stickers to commemorate some of my bigger videos, like the iPod one, and decided to do one for this video as well. You'll find a ton of other fun, unrelated stuff on there though. This is basically my version of a Patreon or YouTube merch, so if you want to support the channel, check it out. It's shop.digitalghetto.net. Links will be everywhere. I'll make it inescapable. So the design of this board is obviously very antiquated, but I think charmingly so. Honestly, from a visual perspective, it's my favorite or second favorite Realforce, though I know not everyone is into a retro look. Functionally, it's a bit bulky with its forehead, the cable is not detachable and is just annoying to deal with, super thick and stiff, hard to manage in a setup, it almost feels like Cat 6. While the switches have held up flawlessly, the case itself is pretty worn. It might be hard to see on camera, but there's shine and slight discoloration on the front, probably from my wrist, and this thing is making quite a bit of creaking sounds at this point, which is not surprising for a plastic clamshell design, but is unfortunate for a $300 keyboard. That's not to say that it isn't solid though. There's very limited flex for a plastic housing and typing feel is solid, but like basic DIY kits are easily surpassing this in 2025 for less money. However, the keycaps have next to no wear on them because they're PBT. All Realforce keyboards, with the exception of the RGB gamer-focused boards, ship with high-quality PBT keycaps, which is a big value add. The switches in this one are uniform 55 gram. I believe this to be the heaviest weight they ever made, and it would appear they no longer offer it today. Compared to mechanical switches of the same or even a little less weight, I always found this to be less fatiguing, but the tactile bump in the rubber dome is very prominent on this board, and as much as I loved this thing, I always wondered if going to the next weight down would be a more comfortable experience. Not too long after I got my first board, Topre would announce a successor, the R2. Now, just coming off of buying what was an insanely expensive keyboard, it was impossible for me to justify dropping another $300 to have more good feeling of oneness with cup rubber. But within the R2 lineup was a special version called the PFU Limited, named after the company which produces the Happy Hacking keyboard, and I strongly felt that it would be my dream Topre. It took a long time, but in 2023, with the help of a sale, I finally acquired one. Just looking at the box, it's very plain to see that Topre stepped up their game. This is presented as a consumer-facing product rather than a business-to-business one, and the image is a bit more high-end, more in line with the high price tag. While still understated and a bit antiquated compared to what you'll see on most people's desks, the R2 design is a significant modernization compared to the R1. The rounded corners and forehead are gone. This is a much slimmer design with hard angles. I obviously have the black model here, which looks more modern and sleek, but the off-white one does still have that 90s, 2000s look. This is still a plastic shell design, but with a much nicer feeling plastic, with significantly less chassis squeak and basically no flex. While the R1 design has a special place in my heart, in actual use, this is a better keyboard in every way. Really, the only major complaint I have about this design is that it still uses a fixed cable, but at least the jacket is much more flexible than the R1. As I mentioned, this is the PFU Limited version, which means the switches are 45 gram silenced. Now, I long suspected this would be the ideal Topre setup, and it is. Compared to 55 gram, the reduction in weight leads to a more effortless and buttery typing experience, while still maintaining a well-defined tactile bump. I find the silenced part to be less of a big deal. Topre is not inherently that loud compared to the vast majority of mechanical switches, but it does give this a unique sound signature. This board is peak Realforce for me. It gives me everything I want and nothing I don't. A mature, understated design that blends into a setup, an efficient but practical 10-keyless layout, high-quality PBT keycaps, perfect switch weight, perfect sound, no RGB, no gimmicks, no annoying software pop-ups, just perfect out-of-the-box, no modifications or add-ons required. I would have been content to end my Topre journey here, but more recently, Topre has really started to expand their lineup and presence, at least in their domestic Japanese market. In 2023, Topre released the R3 generation, and it's a pretty big shakeup. The body design is back to the rounded corners of the R1, it even has the forehead again. Finally, a Realforce keyboard has a detachable cable and it's USB-C, but there's also a Bluetooth mode powered by two AA's. Now you'll notice that I don't have this keyboard, and that's for a reason. I don't value wireless at all, and while I think it's an okay design, there's nothing this offers me over the R2 that would compel me to drop $250 on it. And it seems like Topre understands that, as they have another model that lives alongside this, the R3S. Now this might look familiar, and that's because you just saw it earlier. It's basically the R2, but seemingly slightly cost-cut. It's only available in black, and while the keycaps are still PBT, they're now laser printed. Other than that, this should be the same typing experience as the R2, and it's offered with silenced 45-gram or 30-gram, or non-silenced 45-gram. There is one final all-new model in the lineup which was introduced pretty recently that caught my attention. This is the RC1, the smallest and most unique Realforce model to date. It's a 75% board, basically a happy hacking keyboard but without the goofy layout and unique shortcut setup. Like the R3, it is also wireless or wired with a USB-C port. The design is really attractive. Unfortunately, the white model didn't exist yet when I got mine because that's just straight up gorgeous, not just in Realforce world, but in general. While it's still plastic on the outside, this is the best feeling Realforce I've used. Despite having such a thin and compact housing, there's absolutely no flex or creaking, and while it doesn't feel as beefy as the R2, typing on it feels uniquely solid in a way that my other Realforces don't, despite this being the lightest Realforce ever made. This is their most on-trend design ever, which maybe isn't saying much for Realforce, but I think this kind of signals their full transformation from obscure brands sold to data input salaryman offices to something of a luxury consumer brand that's seeking to appeal to keyboard enthusiasts. Because it's a compact board, I decided this would be my gaming Topre, and therefore the perfect opportunity to have my first experience with the 30-gram Switch, which is also silenced on this board. It's light, for sure, and while there's enough of a tactile bump left to let you know you activated the switch, it's so faint that it's nearing a linear switch in feel. It took a bit of an adjustment period, but I really enjoy using this weight now. It's super comfortable, and for gaming, it's by far the way to go. So if these boards are so good, why does no one use them? Well, the big reason is that people just don't know about them. Hopefully this video helps with that. But that aside, there are pretty good reasons why people would avoid these. The first being price and value. Until the last year or two, a Realforce keyboard was a $250 to $300 proposition in a product segment where most people are spending maybe $60 to $150 on recognizable brand names in the higher end, or highly reviewed value options in the lower end. They're also probably not visually appealing to most people, especially for the price. No RGB, no crazy colors, no metal housings, and aside from the RC1, they look like they're from a different decade. These days, price is not the issue it used to be, as I'll discuss later, but it's still a big ask to take the money you could spend on a well-known, thoroughly understood product and instead take a risk on the oddball option, which you can't really test out unless you take a flight to Japan and go to Yodobashi Camera. The second reason is availability. In the past, it was very difficult to buy one of these keyboards. You either proxied one from Japan or went to a third-party seller on Amazon or eBay with no guarantee that you'd get a warranty or anything like that. During the R2 generation, Realforce's official distributor in the US was the Fujitsu Scanner Store. Now, they don't do that anymore, and I can't find an archive of it, but I swear to God, I am not making this up. It was a weird corporate-facing website selling business-grade, scanners and printers, and then they had a small section for keyboards where they had Realforce and HHKB. I don't think it takes the mind of a business genius to realize that selling $250 luxury keyboards on the Fujitsu Scanner Store is a bad idea. These days, the official channel for Realforce in the US is mechanicalkeyboards.com. That's where I got my RC1, and they also sell third-party on Amazon, though there's a slight markup, presumably due to Amazon seller fees. The third reason is the lack of customization. We live in a world full of affordable keyboards with hot swappable switches, kits with like 5 different material choices and 15 different colors, and a vibrant community producing an endless supply of keycap sets. That's largely the appeal of the keyboard hobby: infinite customization, dialing in on exactly what you like and trying new things. While it could be seen as a pro, Realforce keyboards are pretty much perfect out of the box, going Topre closes you off to almost all of that side of the hobby. Topre stems are not the same as Cherry MX style. There are Topre keycaps on the market, but they're very limited, with mostly unappealing colorways directly from Topre or HHKB. In the past, I did see more third-party stuff from places like KBD Fans. I have tried one of those sets, and it's just not very nice. Look at how my enter key broke. I've never seen anything like this before. The RGB Realforce that I've been mentioning and kind of avoiding is compatible with Cherry MX stems, but it does so with these sliders that significantly impact switch feel. The Cooler Master I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the Nova Touch, also used sliders for compatibility, and there have been some aftermarket sliders, and while I've heard decent things about the Nova Touch and it's now something of a collector's item, it seems like all of these sliders are going to negatively change typing feel, so I've just never pursued this. There are ways to enhance your Topre typing experience, but there's only like 3 of them. You can buy and install third-party silencing rings, and there are aftermarket domes. What I have here are BKE Redux domes. They completely transform the feel with a way stronger tactile bump and more pronounced sound. This is by far the single most transformative thing you can change on a Topre board. Unfortunately, they're not available anymore, but I found these from Desk Keys, which I've never tried, that seem like they're trying to fill that void. Then there's the big one, the Norbaforce, an excessively luxurious aftermarket housing for the Realforce R1, R2, and likely R3S as well. Now, there's an entire video's worth of lore that could be divulged here, but Ryan Norbauer is an obsessive keyboard creator at this point, and in 2017, he was somehow able to justify producing this. This thing is just preposterously well designed and executed. It's a big hunk of machined aluminum that opens from the bottom to hide all the seams, and you even get a wool insert to dampen the sound. This is an incredible keyboard housing, not just compared to the stock Realforce plastic clamshells, but compared to some of the nicest keyboards you'll see showcased on YouTube. This is easily one of the more ridiculous objects I own and living proof of my Topre addiction. But when he announced that he would be mostly discontinuing production, I had to clear out some old stuff and make sure I could get one a few years back. Was it worth it? For me, yes, it's a piece of Realforce history and takes the cup rubber experience to a level that even Topre themselves could never achieve. Typing into this heavy aluminum block isolates the feeling of each keystroke, and the sound, it's like the LFA of Topre. This guy knows what's up, and he's actually making his own complete keyboard now, ready to type out of the box. It's using electrocapacitive switches and has this fancy stabilizer tech. I'd love to try that out. If the Norbaforce is like a Louis Vuitton Topre, this thing is like an Hermes made-to-order Topre. Unfortunately, it's going to cost $3,600, so I'm not getting one, and I don't think I'll ever get to see it, but that's probably the final frontier for cup rubber. So to get back to the point, upgrade options and customization with Topre are very limited. I've done pretty much everything you can do and just showed it to you. And most of this stuff isn't even available anymore. Topre themselves have tried to fix this by offering interchangeable faceplates on the R3, but it just ends up looking like something for kids or teenagers from the 2000s. So if you're somehow not deterred by the price or the lack of access to customization, your next question is probably, which one should I get? Today there are 4 models of Realforce to choose from: the R3, R3S, RC1, and the RGB gamer board. Unless you've gotta have Miku, I would stay away from the RGB line. It makes little sense and I've only heard negative things. For $250, the R3 feels quite expensive for what it is and could only be justified if you really want wireless. Otherwise, I would just go for the R3S. At around $150 unsilenced, I feel like the price isn't in crazy land anymore. Can you get really good mechanical keyboards for the same or less on Amazon with better features and potentially better materials? Yep. But if typing was a priority, I could see myself making an argument for the R3S. Again, if you're mostly gaming, go get one of those linear boards, but for $150, you're getting what I'm convinced is the most satisfying and comfortable typing experience out of the box. The RC1 is really cool, but really expensive. I feel like it's for the existing Topre enthusiast rather than for someone who's never felt cup rubber. If you can handle the cut-down layout, it's the best-feeling stock Topre I've had, and would be a good fit for a setup that's split between gaming and productivity. In terms of switch weight, 45 gram is the most authentic Topre experience. You get enough comfort, but still feel the tactile bump. If you want to try Topre, I would strongly recommend you go 45 gram. Silenced is nice to have, but I think I could live without it. 30 gram is quite light and may require some adjustment, but it's really been growing on me lately and could end up becoming a new favorite for me. I think it's better for gaming, and if you want something that's closer to a linear feel, it's a good pick. 55 gram doesn't seem to be produced anymore, but I feel it is a little too heavy. Variable weight is also no longer listed anywhere, but I would definitely avoid that. These keyboards have become a part of me, at least the part of me that interfaces with a computer. I do play around with mechanical switches sometimes, and I'd like to explore that world more, but I think the Topre Switch is just like home for me. I always come back to it, it feels the most natural, and I can't imagine typing without them. They are weird, they're a hard sell, and as much as I love them, they probably don't have a place in most people's lives. I don't imagine that a lot of people are going to rush to order a Realforce after watching this, but if it does speak to you and you've never really been satisfied by traditional mechanical switches, this might just be the alternative that you didn't know existed.